PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. That is something that you have heard probably through TV or heard on the news or something like that. A lot of times it happens with a lot of military people, especially if they've been out to war and they have PTSD from the things that they have seen and heard and everything like that. And a lot of times the symptoms of PTSD is your troubling thoughts, feelings, emotions, having like really bad dreams, having bad feelings, not being comfortable around certain situations. Now, understanding that blanket definition, because it's a lot deeper than that. PTSD is a whole lot deeper than that. Understanding that blanket situation, do you guys think that there is PTSD in the Black community for a lot of people that have seen the stuff that we went through? I mean, literally think about it. We said it at the beginning of this video, was talking about the racial, historical things that has happened to Black people, slavery, Jim Crow laws, segregation. Still to this day, seeing people get beat up by the cops, and nothing happening to these cops, and people saying that it's their fault, the reason why it happened. You don't think that that's going to have some sort of knee-jerk reaction to people whenever they get into one of these situations? But I'm not going to go too deep in it. I'm going to let you guys talk about it. How do you guys feel about that? Just jump in. Whoever want to jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to start off with this because I totally wholeheartedly believe in generational trauma, historical trauma, especially. So there's like familial specific historical trauma, and then there's the generational and historical trauma for the Black community. For the Black community in particular, I believe, like, for example, certain circumstances, like for the Black household, like how the Black man was basically ripped away from the household, whether it be from police brutality or false incriminalization, incarcerament, and things like that forced the Black woman to become stronger, for example. And that's like a cause and effect reaction that we can see like live today, and that we've seen many of the results of that. But I think that's very important. And then for a familial perspective, like our grandparents were slaves and things like that. And that I think that that would have a very heavy impact on how we interact today. But I guess for me in particular and for my family, what I've observed is like the issues of like, so say for example, my mom and my grandmom had issues as in their individual relationship, and they had like fights and things like that. And then I observed the same thing with my sister and my mom, and I'm just like, oh, well, I think it's just my sister and mom, and they're having this issue right now. But if I didn't know about what was happening in the past, I might not be able to connect the dots. And um, I think that a lot of the issues that we struggle with individually may not be our own. Like, what if I was struggling with alcoholism or depression or something like that, and I didn't know that my father and my grandfather and my great grandfather were all struggling with the same thing? So I'm taking on the burden of this issue as if it's my own, but it's really a generational issue that could be stopped with me. But unless I connect the dots and realize that this issue is not necessarily my own, then I might not be able to fully resolve it.
Yeah. So Derek, you about to say something real quick, dude? I see.
Well, no, well, I didn't know if Jess was going to pop in real quick, but I want to say something from two perspectives, right? So to add to what Carrington said, my cousins and a couple of my close friends, we kind of formed like a little group called Team No Squares, right? Shout out Team No Squares. But this is kind of like when we were all, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. And we would come together and just get together and talk, right? Talk about relationships, talk about, different things like that. And as we all kind of started opening up and talking more, we started to identify how our parents, who were cousins, had so many secrets that were coming out that we were talking about amongst ourselves. And it's kind of like, well, why would they do that? Like, we can see literally within a generation, a separation of 2 generations, how we look at things totally different. Like, why would they do that? Why would they cheat? Why would they do X, Y, Z? Never tell anybody. And all this stuff is coming out Finding out we have cousins that we didn't know about, or a lot of heavy stuff. But I would say us navigating through that was the ability to create a safe space for us to have a conversation and really kind of dive in, not one, to understand that we weren't alone, right? Because literally, like, we were having similar experiences at the same time and didn't even know it until we had conversations. We was like, yo, where you were going through that? And so that helped us to kind of create a space where we can now look at it and say, okay, how we don't want to be like them, right? And how do we now support each other in that conversation? So when we were talking earlier about, 4% of psychiatrists or psychologists, therapists being Black, one of the things that I think we all can do, or we probably all do within our circles now, we have small group of friends that we have conversations with, or family or cousins, that we could talk about things that help us to navigate a way of to express and release it, right? Which helps to kind of, deal with the PTSD that we might have, to see, okay, how something is showing up in our life today that we don't know why it's showing up. And now we see the lens of what's happening because, oh, it was our parent and what they did or what they said and kind of how they treated us, or kind of how they didn't want to share with us and was very, closed mouth and don't tell family business out in the street, keep it to yourself. And then we don't have a conversation amongst each other. And so that was one thing that really helped us. But then the second part is, for me, from a business perspective, right? I just got over some PTSD from clients, right? Waking up, having anxiety every morning when I get up, being triggered by how new clients were doing something based on how an old client did something that, was really a traumatic experience from just, working and hustling and not being good enough. And everything you put out there was never something that they could accept. Oh, it was great, but you could have did better here. Right. And so it's an experience, right? It's how people, talk. It's the emotion that happens within a very heightened sense of, oh, dang, I'm not good enough, or yo, every time I did this, X happened. And so it becomes this, this autopilot type of situation. And it wasn't until I had a conversation with a friend that was like, that sounds like your experience with XYZ client. And I was like, yo, I never correlated the two because I just didn't see it like that. And it really went back to me and how I selected clients, right? I was selecting clients and doing things that made me choose the other client in the first place. So I wasn't seeing, really the pattern that I was already in, this loop that I was repeating over and over again. And it was there. But having those conversations, right, to Carrington's point, and really seeing what it is, and how it's layered within your responses, your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, how you respond. And if you never really find the trigger point, right, if you never really find the source, then you repeat it in a lot of different areas of your life. The same type of client becomes the same type of person that you in a relationship, and how you treat your mama or how you pick your friends. And it just becomes a cycle in all areas. And so it's very important when we talk about, PTSD, the emotions are the same, right? In a sense, like we have a finite number of emotions, right? Out in the world, there's a lot of them, but there's a finite number. And we're all going to experience at some point throughout the day some sort of emotion the same, right? Happiness, sadness, anger, frustration, jealousy, or whatever. We're going to experience that at some point. And those are the things that connect us. But if we never really find out what the emotion is under that PTSD umbrella, right, then those emotions can show up in different places because those emotions are not limited to just this one area, right? So that's just my 3.5 cents on that.
Yeah, and also there's a thing that one of my previous therapists shared with me called the you could probably see it on Google. It's the emotion wheel, and that was one of the things that she brought up because I was talking about anger I was feeling, and she told me that anger in the hierarchy of emotions is a secondary emotion, and that more often than not, when you're experiencing anger, there's a primary emotion that's behind that. So for me, more often than not, there was a certain sadness, some version of a sadness that was behind it, or some version of a fear that was behind it that was leading to the response, because like the anger is usually coming in response. So it's like being able to have like those breakdowns and those layers to be able to look at, okay, let me look at my whole experience and let me see where these concepts apply, so that I can like look at it from a more sterile point of view. Because like when you're going through the PTSD and you're having these experiences that keep repeating themselves, or if anything, for my case, I had specific instances that just kept replaying in my head because I'm so used to like, going to the review booth on my life and just trying to, see what's different after further review, and it's usually nothing. It's usually just me blaming myself. But it took time for me to be able to look and be like, all right, I went into it wrong. Like it took time. Like, and when I say time, I'm talking about like stuff I went through like half a lifetime ago. I'm looking at now, like, oh, okay, like I'm in an emotionally stable enough position where I can take responsibility for the poor action I took then that led to the poor response that left me hurt. And I mean, these in my instance, like that's not going to be everyone's instance. There are definitely times where people do you wrong and then you end up having a maladaptive response. But, also just being able to like figure out how best to, make quality decisions in the midst of, low quality circumstances is a big part of being able to establish that mental health that we all want to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it even to touch on that, I think if you don't, deal with those emotions, if you don't kind of dive deep into those emotions and you don't even understand them or know what it is that is triggering that PTSD, it kind of bleeds over into other, like you said, or bleeds over into other aspects of your life. And it almost ends up becoming this continuous cycle, this continuous loop. They say like kind of, learn from your mistakes or you're doomed to repeat it. Well, also learn from your triggers, learn from what you have experienced, the things that hurt you, the things that made you sad. But in order to do that, you have to dig down and find out why. What is the cause behind why I am reacting this way. And, I think it's so important, and because it can bleed. It's kind of like my friend used to say, if you get a glass cup, they fill it with water, but then you put one drop of dye in there, it entires that entire cup into whatever that color dye is. And so if you have, you can be pure, innocent, good-hearted, but you have that one moment or that one experience that really traumatized you or left you, feeling broken or depressed or anything. And if you that completely changes your outlook on the world. That completely changes so much of your emotions and thoughts and feelings going on forward later down in the road. They can bleed into your relationships. They can, the way you react, the way you respond to things. They can bleed into your personal life, your work life. And so it almost like that one drop or that one experience, pulls over or feels that in the entire rest of your life if you don't deal with it in that moment. And so
What's so interesting about that is whenever like little things happen, I don't know if you guys ever noticed that, like whenever little things happen, and I noticed this a lot more when people talk about their dating life or their relationships. Whenever that one little thing happened and then it happens again with another person, it triggers like this audio response to how to deal with that. You know what I mean? And they automatically think, all right, this person's cheating on me, or this person's playing me, or this person's only like a lot of times, because I've seen it with both men and women, but to use a woman as a response, like a lot of times women will see that with like, okay, I know this guy wants to just sleep with me. I know this person wants to just do that. They don't really care about me as a person. So you can see how if you don't deal with these things, it can manifest into something bigger. Like you were saying, Sean, like that little dot can change everything that's around there. And even though it might, like, even if you put that little drop in like a pool, even though it's like a pool, it can still change everything in even the size of a pool. So what makes us think that can't happen into our minds? That little thing is called, I believe, Zig Ziglar had, I don't know if you guys ever heard of Zig Ziglar before, but he's a big motivational speaker. And one of the things he says is don't be a sniop, meaning don't be susceptible to other people's thoughts and emotions about you. Like, it's kind of like someone leaving rats in your head. Like, if somebody were to bring a bag of rats, leave it in your living room floor, all dead, everything like that, what would you do? You would probably kick their ass out and then take the rats and throw them away. Why you let people do that in your mind with the things that they say and with how they feel towards you? Like those little rats are what's continuing to stay in our brains, and it's just like a hamster wheel, and it just keeps going and going and going until you actually address it. And a lot of times, this is what happens in the Black community, is that we don't address that hamster that is on that wheel. in our minds.
But we were talking about addressing emotions and how like different emotions, like if like unaddressed, they could affect like all the different areas of our life. Specifically for me, a large part of my experience is about like up and down days, and like certain days I'll be feeling perfectly fine and I'm thriving and stuff like that, and then the next day I'll be like completely depressed and I'm just like, okay, like what changed, what happened, and why? But then the good day comes like maybe 2 or 3 days after that, and I'm just like, oh, okay, guess there was never a problem in the first place. Then I go back to normal, and then the cycle just repeats itself, and I never really get to understanding what the emotions are that got me back down in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I
Exactly.
think journaling is a very important part of that, because that's what helped me get out of that experience. Because I would like when I was down and depressed, I would journal and like reasons as to why I'm feeling this way, and I'll write down everything that I'm feeling. And then when I'm up, I'll notice that my down journals are like the same thing over and over and over. I'm just like, oh, okay, maybe that's the problem. And then I'll cut that out, and I'm just like, wow, okay.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you say that. You know, one of the things that's for me is learning. Okay, now that I have these emotions, and I feel that way sometimes as well.